Alright, howdy folks, it's Lich, and I'm going to do a quick video on how I use D2ArmorPicker to put my builds together. This isn't going to be scripted, so bear with me, this is going to be a little bit longer form, not as concise, but hopefully it will have the information you need to understand how to use D2ArmorPicker and save you a lot of time for the future. So I have the site open, I have the game open, and the best flow, kind of the best workflow I have found for using D2 Armor Picker is to first start by putting your subclass together on the game itself. So let's, for example, let's say that I want to make an arc hoil build for Titan. Um, so I have Strand on right now. I obviously don't have foil on. It's in my inventory, and I already know what my build's going to be. But for the sake of demonstration, let me just remake it from scratch. So first, let's switch to Arc, and in the subclass, I'm going to make sure that I have all the abilities that I want on. I'm not really going to go over what the subclass or like what the build I'm using is. That's not really the point of the video. Instead, I'm just going to put everything on that I would use for the build. So my philosophy for making builds in D2 is always that the stats that you have other than resilience should not come at the sacrifice of your build functionality. So even though I'm putting on fragments that have, a penalty to stats here, right? This has a -10 discipline. This has +10 strength. That's nice, but I'm not using this because of the strength, and I'm not going to worry about this despite it taking away discipline. The effect that this gives me is more important than any stats, right? So as long as I'm able to hit 100 resilience, doesn't matter about anything else. Obviously, higher stats is better afterwards, but I'm not going to sacrifice my build effects just to get higher stats, right? So first things first, I figure out what my build's going to have. This is everything I'm going to use. Then, either looking at the fragments themselves or just hovering over the subclass, either here or on the mod screen, right? I can see that I have a -10 to discipline and a +10 to strength. The next step you are going to do is you are going to figure out what armor mods you want to use ahead of time. Now, this is where things get a little bit more complicated if you are a newer player and you don't have a lot of resources, right? Because I can work under the assumption that every armor piece I have will have 10 mod slot energy. And if you do not have the resources to upgrade your gear, you may not be working under that assumption. And there are ways to kind of handle that with D2 Armor Picker. But it does make it a little bit more work. So for now, I'm going to go under the thought process that I will be able to masterwork my gear. So whatever D2 Armor Picker tells me to use, I'm going to continue from this point on with the idea that it is either already masterworked or that I will be able to masterwork it. And then later on I'll touch on what to do if that isn't the case for you. So first thing you're going to do, doesn't matter what armor pieces you have on right now, right? Doesn't matter. We're not going to use them. You just need to figure out what your mod costs are going to be, because this is going to affect what armor you are going to use. So let's say for my Hoyle build, I want to have a Harmonic Siphon for an arc weapon, and then the hands-on Ashes to Assets, just so I can get more super energy. And don't fill this slot in. You don't care about the actual stat slot. All you care about is seeing how much energy you have left in your armor piece, because you're going to tell D2 Armor Picker how much mod energy you have left for it to allocate into stat mods, right? So by telling D2 Armor Picker that my helmet has 3 energy left, it will calculate a loadout for me, assuming that it can put in any of the mods that cost 3 or less here. So it's not going to put together a loadout and ask me to wear, you know, a plus 10 Resil mod here because I told it, or I will be telling it, I don't have enough energy for that, right? Because once again, the functionality of your build is more important than the stats. So long as you are able to hit 100 resilience, you should not sacrifice good armor mods for stats. So next I'm going to go to my arms. I'm going to, once again, I'm just going to put on whatever I want for my loadout. I'm not really going to go into detail about it. 3 energy left over. Now, chest piece, I'm going to touch on something here. When you're putting your build together, the chest is pretty devoid of interesting choices because almost everything here in PvE, I should clarify, is not worth running over resistance mods. You should always be spending all 3 of these slots on resistance mods. And I would argue that if you are able to masterwork your chest piece, you should always be spending at least 7 energy on resistance mods. 1 element, another element, and a concussive or a melee for specific builds, maybe a sniper for specific encounters. The rest of these aren't worth using. If you need Lucent Blades for a damage rotation, you can just swap to them for that specific damage rotation. If you need extra ammo, put on reserve mods before you rally at a flag and then take them off. Unflinching mods should never be used in PvE. Font of Endurance is terrible, Charged Up is terrible, Emergency Reinforcement is terrible. None of these mods should ever be equipped. So for my loadout, I'm just going to assume 7 energy dedicated to resist mods. I have this on every single build. Every single dim loadout I share always has 7 energy dedicated to resist mods. Legs. Kind of similar to chest piece in that you should always be running recuperation except for very niche scenarios. Those scenarios are you are running the void fragment that gives you devour on orb pickup because that will heal you when you take an orb. You can run recuperation with it to get more healing since they nerfed devour in Season of the Wish to no longer be a full heal. It gives you half of your health, so you can add recuperation on to get like 80% of your health back on orb pickup instead of half, but it's not as crucial. If you do not have a void fragment for devour on orb pickup, you should be running recuperation. The only other time that I wouldn't run recuperation is if you are playing in some type of difficult solo content or difficult group content where picking up orbs is so incredibly unlikely that you won't be able to ever use this. But even in GMs, I still run this if I'm running with a group because I know I will be able to get orbs and they will save your life. So recuperation, you should have it on. Other 2 slots, basically whatever your build needs. In my case, I'm going to run double absolution. 3 energy slots left. Class item, final thing. Nothing here is like a must-have like legs and chest are, so just put on whatever your build needs. Again, stat mods don't matter. So I have 5 energy left here. So this is my loadout. These are the mods, and mostly you just do this to figure out how much energy you have left in each slot. It's nice to have an idea as to what you're going to equip ahead of time, but we're going to have to manually re-equip these mods. It's just important to know how much energy we have left in each slot. Okay, so that's the setup. Now let's actually open D2ArmorPicker and have it do the work for us to put our build together. So let's take a look at the user interface here. So at the top, you can select which character you're on. That'll just change, you know, what armor pieces it looks at and what exotics are down here. So I'm using Titan, so we'll select Titan. Then this section is where we're going to work the magic, but we're going to ignore this for now, right? So this is where we will pick stats eventually, but first let's scroll down a little bit further in order to tune things. So first, armor selection. This build is centered around Hoyle. The exotic armor piece is the keystone of every build. So this tells D2ArmorPicker when I select Hoyle here that it must pick Heart of Inmost Light for my chest piece. It will look at all of the copies that I have in my vault in order to find the best one. So if you have multiple exotic armor pieces, it will look at all of them, but it will force the chest piece, in this case, to be Hoyle. And if I clicked a different exotic, it would force that different exotic, right? So I could pick Aeons, I could pick Skullfort, right? And it will force that specific exotic to be on. Now, you have some extra options here, so you can have it look at collections, or you can have it look at like Xur um, when determining what your loadouts are, but generally you shouldn't need these. You just have what's in your vault. So then we have armor limitation. So this is where the energy that we looked at earlier is important. So what we do here is we tell ArmorPicker how much energy we need reserved for our build and how much is left over for it to spend. So I need to set all of these to 7 because I have 7 energy spent. It defaults to having 5 here, um, just because there are no stat mods that will take more than that. Honestly, it could default to 6 because I don't think any stat mods cost more than 4 energy. But yeah, it defaults to 5. And then my class item, I only have 5 spent, so I don't have to click anything here, right? So now D2ArmorPicker knows for a fact that in the first 4 slots, helmet, arms, chest, legs, it can slot in a plus 10 mobility, discipline, or strength mod, but it can only slot in a plus 5 resilience, recovery, or intellect mod. Same thing for all these slots, but at the bottom, my class item, D2ArmorPicker knows it has enough free energy to stick in any of the plus 10 stat mods. Now, if you need to restrict what mod slot your armor has, you can do that here. But generally speaking, most players should never use this. Um, Unless you really, really need a specific special mod, such as like you're doing a low man raid and you really need Root of Nightmares armor or King's Fall armor, you can restrict it here. But generally speaking, never restrict it. Then we go down to the fragment selection. You just pick which subclass you're using. I'm using Arc, and it only lists the fragments that have plus or minus stats on them. So I was using Spark of Shock and Spark of Resistance. So I'm just going to tick these 2 on, and now D2ArmorPicker will calculate, assuming there is a inherent minus 10 discipline and minus 10 strength, plus 10 strength coming from my build. Finally, we have the advanced settings. For the most part, you can leave these off. There are a couple of things that you may want to check off under the masterwork section, but the rest of this you basically can ignore. So the only thing about the masterwork section is these different checkboxes. So the first one, assume all legendary items are masterwork. This will make D2ArmorPicker assume that whatever armor pieces it picks, you are going to masterwork if they are not already masterwork. Because when you masterwork armor, it has more mod slot energy, and it also gets plus 12 stats, plus 2 in each of the 6 stats, for 12 in total. And that will change how ArmorPicker calculates what armor you should use. So if you have the resources to upgrade your armor and you are comfortable with upgrading whatever it tells you to, then you want to have this checked because it will calculate assuming, the masterwork version of the armor. If you don't have the resources to masterwork things, then you don't want this checked. And it will only look at the armor pieces as they are, um, with no masterwork bonus. Same thing for the exotic, same thing for the class item, right? These all function the same way, it's just the different slots, right? So this is your helmet, chest, arms, legs, this is your exotic pieces, this is your class items. So because I know that I will be able to upgrade whatever it asks me to put on, I leave all 3 of these checked. Now, the other thing you can do is you can force it to use things that are already masterwork instead of assuming things are masterwork, right? So if I uncheck these boxes, it will look at the armor I have, and it will pick between normal and masterwork armor, right? Whatever ends up giving me the best combination. If I select these, it will ignore everything that is not masterwork. This is useful if you want to ensure that you have enough mod energy to use what you want for your mods, because if you aren't assuming that things are masterworked, D2ArmorPicker is still going to assume that you're able to put in the stat mods that it's asking of you. So these are some other options just to tailor things a little bit. Generally speaking, I leave the first 3 on, I leave the bottom 2 off. That is basically all we need to do to actually set up D2ArmorPicker to put our build together. So at this point, we have everything configured. Our settings are selected. We have Hoyle selected, and we have our fragments put in. Now, how to actually use this? It is incredibly simple. Basically, this section here of the stats tells you what stat you can possibly achieve with everything else that you have input so far. So with the fragments I've selected, with forcing Hoyle to be on my chess piece, and everything's masterworked, the game is telling me, or Armor Picker's telling me, I could get, if I wanted, 90 in mobility, 100 in resilience, 90 in recovery, and 100 in discipline and electro strength. However, that's not in all of the stats. That's just saying any of them if that is your priority. So let's say if I select resilience, now it will update what I can get on the other stats. So now, because I've selected 100 resilience, D2ArmorPicker is telling me, okay, if you want 100 resilience, you can potentially have 80 mobility or 80 recovery, but you can't have 90 like you did before, because there's no combination of armor that you currently own in your vault that you could put on and equip mods and fragments to get 100 resilience and 90 either mobility or recovery, right? With the limitations of armor mod energy I've given it and fragments I've selected, it is impossible for me to get 100 resilience and 90 mobility or recovery. If I wanted to get these higher, that means I would either need to buy more armor pieces that have better mobility or recovery, or I would need to make sacrifices in my armor mods or in my fragments. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, you should never do that. Your build is more important than every stat except for resilience. And because I'm able to get 100 resilience, the rest of my stats don't matter, right? So I can prioritize my mods and my fragments. Now, at this point, I can start picking the other stats that I want. So for my Hoyle build, personally, I want 100 discipline next. So I select that, and now it updates the stats based off of what I can now get, assuming that I'm putting 100 in my resilience and my discipline. Now, some other comments to make really quick. You don't really want to check the locks. What they are going to do is basically force this stat to have like exactly T10 resilience. Otherwise, it may go like above. That really doesn't matter because we're going to select all of these stats uh, based off of our, what our goals are anyways. So, because we're not done yet. So now, let's say I want a balanced amount of recovery and strength. I value both of these stats on my Hoyle loadout. So let's say I want, I don't know, let's see, 60 recovery and I could get up to 70 strength. Now, you can actually tweak these a little bit. Let's say if I went to 50 recovery, how much strength could I get? Oh, I could get up to 80, right? Or if I set this back to 0 and I select, 50 strength, oh, I could get up to 70 recovery, right? So you can play around with these a little bit. You don't always have to select the rightmost number, you can select something a little bit lower and just see what your options are. So let's say I want to force, I want 60 recovery and then as high of a strength as I can get while also having 60 recovery. That ends up being 70 strength. Finally, it looks at the last two, the last two stats I have, intellect and mobility. I haven't selected, anything in either of these yet. So the final thing that you would do is determine whether or not you even care about having, as high of a mobility or as high of an intellect as you could get. So if we look over to the right here, every single loadout that I've put together is always going to have 20 mobility and 23 intellect, and that's just because of the base stats that I have equipped. But let's see if I can fiddle around with this a little bit more and see if I can potentially get something a bit different. There we go. So let's, this isn't perfect because I could still select 70 here, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to achieve what I want. What I want to have happen is have the option to select a higher intellect even if I don't need it. So let's just go with hypothetical then. So let's say hypothetically I'm not able to select 60 or 70 here, or actually let's just set the 60. Let's say hypothetically I'm not able to get 70 strength, right? It just doesn't work out. Pretend this is grayed out, but I could get up to 30 intellect, right? Now, if you look over here, these are all the possible builds that Armor Picker has for me to use. If I sort, I can sort by these various stats, but these don't really do anything because I've already told Armor Picker these stats you must have for me to, to use the build, right? It must be 100 resil, 60 recovery, 100 discipline, 60 strength. So every single build going to have T10 resilience, T6 recovery, T10 discipline, T6 strength. But intellect and mobility might vary, right? And so if we look, we can see that there's one of these loadouts here. This has 30 intellect, whereas the rest of these all have 20, right? So I could force D2ArmorPicker to give me only 30 intellect builds, only 20 or higher intellect builds, or 0 or higher. Now, the reason why I'm drawing attention to this is the mods that you have equipped, right? Some of them are going to cost more energy than others. So I told you earlier to figure out all of the mods that are must-haves on your build, figure out how much energy is left. But let's say that you either, you've done all your must-haves, but you have some slots open because, there's things that you just weren't sure what you wanted to pick, or maybe you were having trouble hitting 100 resilience, so you had to make some, leave some stuff unselected. And now you need to figure out, what you have left, right? How much energy you have left to spend on the rest of your mods. So you can sort by used mods here, and if you sort by, I believe this is, what is this, ascending? Then the loadouts at the top of this list are going to have the cheapest mods possible, right? So with these mods, we have one major recovery, one minor, one major discipline, two minor, right? So that's a 4 cost, 2 cost, 3 cost, and then 2 1 cost mods. If we go look at this 30 intellect loadout, we can see that the mods it has are slightly more expensive. It's got 2 major discipline instead of just 1. So this loadout here takes more mod energy to equip than the ones at the top that have cheaper mods on. So if I force 30 intellect, it's going to give me a more expensive build, right? And in this specific case, for me, that doesn't matter. But for you, if you only need to ensure that you're hitting the highest stats possible on your key build stats, and the rest of the things you can live without, then you may not want to force it to give you 30 intellect or 30 mobility, or whatever strength, right? You may just want to leave those blank and then just look at whatever build is at the top of the list, sorted by used mods, that hits the requirements you have set for your primary stats, because it'll give you the cheapest mods possible in order to reach those stats, leaving you with more armor energy left over. In my case, I already have guaranteed that I have picked the armor mods that I want to run. So I don't need any excess armor energy left over, right? Everything that's left on these armor pieces, it's completely free for Armor Picker to spend. I don't need it. So I can just, click these to 20, not like it makes a difference here, and then just look at whatever it tells me to run at the top, right? Now, a interesting thing to note here, right, is that the top build that it is, picked out for me, it doesn't need my artifice armor in order to reach these, desired stats, right? So the rest of these mods, or sorry, the rest of these permutations that it has picked for me, they require my artifice armor. This top one doesn't. That doesn't mean that it isn't going to put my artifice armor on. I'm still going to use that class item, but there is no need for the artifice armor mod slot, and also there is no stat that I could assign it to that would make a difference, right? Because none of these stats are, ending in a 7 or higher, and the artifice mod gives +3 to a stat. So even if I, assigned it to any of these stats, it wouldn't raise any of them up to the next tier. So that's why the artifice mod isn't needed, because this combination of helmet, gloves, chest, and legs just happens to be perfect to reach the stats that I want. And I have some other armor in my vault as well that could also do it, but isn't quite as perfect as this top set of armor. So these sets all need the artifice mod to reach the stats that I set. So let's just go with the top one for now in my case, and it will tell you this is the helmet you need, this is the arms, this is the chest, this is the legs. These are what their stats are with a masterwork without armor mods on, right? So this helmet that it wants me to equip has a 4 mobility, a 22 in resilience, 14 recovery, 11 discipline, 4 intellect, 24 strength. So I could just look through my vault manually to find this headpiece, or it's got some nice automatic, buttons for you. The first one is a copy dim query, which will search dim. You'll just paste the query into dim to search for the items. The second is open these armor pieces as a loadout in dim, or the bottom two, we have move items to inventory and equip items. Now, I usually just use equip items because it just is easiest, but you need to be in a location where Bungie allows you to equip items through the API. So, like dim, there are some restrictions in that the API can only equip items for you if you are in orbit, if you are in the tower, or if you are in the helm. So you have to be in one of those locations for this button to work, otherwise it's going to give you errors. So I click this button, and now it will equip those items. In fact, it pulled one of them from my vault to equip them. The rest were already in my inventory, and it shows that we now have all of them equipped. And class item, it doesn't do anything, but that's because the class item doesn't matter. So looking at my class item, or sorry, looking at my my loadout, it has pulled a helmet, arms, my Heart of Inmost Light, and legs. Now, it just so happens to be that the helmet, chest, and legs that it pulled already have some stuff for my Hoyle builds on them, because I have Hoyle builds already. But the armor the arms piece that it is equipped for me has the wrong mods on it because I haven't set that up yet. And my class item obviously doesn't have any mods selected. So looking back at D2ArmorPicker, it is telling me I need to equip 3 major discipline, 1 major recovery, 1 minor recovery to reach my stat goals. So I already know I can't put the major recovery here because I want heavy-handed, focusing strike, and impact induction. I don't have enough to put the major recovery here, but I can put the minor recovery here. And on my class item, the major recovery can go here. And now, if we look at my stats down here, or if I go back to the main mod overview, the stats that I have equipped, or on my character, are the exact ones that D2ArmorPicker had shown I would have. It found the armor for me, and it found the mods for me with the restrictions I've set. I equipped the armor pieces, I equipped the mods, I now have all of the stats that I desired. I can just fill out the rest of my mods, change my appearance, and then save this loadout, and I'm good to go. Alright, and now I've got my whole appearance set up correctly, using the armor pieces the D2ArmorPicker picked for me, with all of the armor mods on that I wanted. And at this point, I'm good to go. I can save this loadout, and I have everything I need optimized by a computer so that I didn't have to do any of that math by hand. And that is how I use D2ArmorPicker.